Kit Carson, Part 13. I was ordered to proceed in advance with a detachment of 15 men. The Californians had received reinforcements during the night. They were now about 150 strong. Throughout the day, they would show themselves on every hill ahead of us. We marched in this way about 7 miles. Late in the evening, when we had arrived within about 400 yards of the water where we intended to camp, they charged us, coming on in 2 bodies and compelling us to retreat to a pile of rocks about 200 yards away on our left. After we had gained this position, the Californians took their stand on another hill about 100 yards farther to our left and opened fire on us. Captain Emery and Captain Turner assumed command of our dragoons and charged the enemy, routing them and gaining possession of their position, which we held throughout the night. On the day we had the first fight, General Kearny had sent 3 men as an express to Commodore Stockton at San Diego. They had now returned and had arrived in plain sight within 500 yards of our camp, when they were taken prisoners by the enemy. On the day before, we had shot the horse of a Mexican lieutenant and taken the rider captive. The parley was now sounded, and we exchanged the lieutenant for one of our own men who had been captured. The place we occupied had barely enough water for the men to drink, and we had nothing to eat but mule meat. The horses were turned loose, and as fast as they got beyond the reach of our guns, they were driven off by the enemy, who had command of the water, about 500 yards in front of us. General Kearny now concluded to march on, regardless of the consequences. About 12 o'clock, we were ready, having prepared litters to convey our wounded on a mule back. Observing our movements, the enemy formed 500 yards in our rear, with the men stationed 10 feet apart so that our artillery could do them but little damage. General Kearny now held a council with his officers. All of us knew that as soon as we should leave the hill, we would have to fight again, and in our present condition, this was inadvisable. The council decided to send to San Diego for reinforcements. Lieutenant Beale of the Navy and I volunteered to carry the message. As soon as it was dark, we started on our mission. To avoid making a noise while crawling over the rocks and brush, we took our shoes off and fastened them under our belts. We could see 3 rows of sentinels, all mounted, and we would frequently have to pass within 20 yards of one. We finally got through, but we had to crawl about 2 miles, and having had the misfortune to lose our shoes, we had to travel barefooted over a country covered with prickly pear and rocks. We reached San Diego the next night, and Commodore Stockton immediately ordered 160 or 170 men to march to General Kearny's relief. They were under the command of a lieutenant and had 1 cannon, which the men hauled along by means of ropes. I remained behind at San Diego, and Lieutenant Beale was sent aboard the frigate Congress. He had become deranged from his excessive exertions and did not entirely recover his health for 2 years. The relief party lay by during the day and traveled by night, and reached Kearny the next night. The enemy fled upon discovering their approach, and Kearny now moved on to San Diego without further molestation. Here he remained about a month, until the wounded recovered. A force of 600 men, led by Stockton and Kearny, then started for Los Angeles, which was occupied by about 700 Mexicans. We arrived within 15 miles of the place on January 8, 1847. The Mexicans had a good position, being in command of a hill where we had to pass the river. We had 2 pieces of cannon directed by Commodore Stockton. The Mexicans withstood only a few rounds of fire when they retreated across the river and encamped for the night on a hill. On January 9, we approached within 3 miles of the Pueblo. After fighting during the day, only our artillery was engaged, however, since whenever the enemy came near us, Commodore Stockton speedily drove them away. On the 10th, we took possession of the Pueblo, which was evacuated by the Mexicans, who now advanced upon Fremont. He was 30 miles distant from the Pueblo. He was marching to Los Angeles with a force of about 400 men that he had raised in the vicinity and had arrived within 30 miles of the place. The Mexicans met him, but instead of fighting him, they surrendered, preferring to yield to him rather than to any other American officer. On January 12, I think Fremont joined us at Los Angeles, where we remained unmolested through the winter. End of part 13.